afternoon, everybody. I'm going to do something that is unprecedented for me and not talk about what we do at A Plastic Planet, but leave the platform and the stage for our three excellent speakers today. But really just to frame what we're going to be talking about. Today, we're going to be talking about managing waste at scale. Highly unsexy title, I think. But I think what is interesting is the whole matter of waste and resources are so intrinsically and so obviously connected. And as humans, we are incessantly trying to extract more and more of nature's resources. And what do we give back? Waste. We are actually the only living species on the planet that produces any kind of waste. We actually produce 3.5 million tons of plastic and solid waste every single day. We recycle very little. Just 9% of plastic alone is recycled in the UK, 4.4% of plastic in the US. In the UK, we still export over 60% of our plastic waste. Incineration is actually classified as recycling in many countries. So that's just to lay really our market stall out for what waste means and how we're handling it right now. But what's going to be very interesting is to hear our next three speakers discuss the role of technology in the different approaches of how we can tackle this very 21st century mounting problem of waste. Our first speaker is Tessa Clarke, who is co-founder and CEO of OLIO, the world's first neighbor-to-neighbor food sharing app, which is solving the problem of household food waste at scale. OLIO has already grown to 2 million users in just over 4 years, and its impact has been widely recognized, most notably by the United Nations, who highlighted OLIO as a beacon for the world, and by Vivitech, who awarded OLIO Next European Unicorn. Tessa Clarke, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here with you. So if we're going to talk about managing waste at scale, then unfortunately we absolutely have to talk about the problem of waste in our homes. Now, perhaps the most important thing to get our heads around when it comes to waste is the fact that every single time we consume, every time we spend a pound, we are simultaneously generating waste, extraordinary amounts of it. Now, when I talk about waste in the home, your mind probably immediately goes to this, bin waste. And there's an enormous amount of bin waste generated every year. In fact, on average, a ton per household per year, which might not sound like that much until you realize that in the UK alone, there are 28 million households generating all that waste. But every time you spend money, there's also invisible waste that is generated. So for example, for every ton of waste that is generated in the home, 50 plus tons of waste have been generated upstream. So when you put out that bin bag every week, you're not actually just putting out one bin bag. You're putting out at least 50 other bin bags as well, due to all the waste that was generated in producing that stuff that ended up in your home. And another type of waste in the home is really an invisible waste. And this is all the things that we have in our homes that are never being used. So a typical American home, for example, has 300,000 items in it. And I am sure that an average European home isn't far behind that as well. And the reality is that these 300,000 things are the world's precious resources that are trapped in your home, not being fully utilized. Meanwhile, 10 doors down, there's a neighbor buying the identical same items brand new. So why is all this waste a problem? Well, there are several problems, but I just want to share a couple with them with you today. So the first is the fact that we are in the midst of a resource depletion crisis. And this is best reflected by the concept of Earth Overshoot Day, which is the day in the year in which humanity has used all the resources that the Earth can replenish in a year. Back in the late 60s, when it was very first measured, Earth Overshoot Day was the 31st of December. So what that means is that we used in a year what the Earth could replenish in a year. We were living in equilibrium with the planet. Happy days. Fast forward to last year, and Earth Overshoot Day was the 29th of July. And what that means is that every single thing that every single one of us, 7.5 billion people, rapidly rising to 10 billion, every single thing that we consumed after the 29th of July last year was net depletive to the planet. Another way of cutting the data is to say, how many Earths would we need if the whole world's population lived like a typical American or a typical Brit? You can see there we would need 5 or 3 planets. And collectively right now, we're living as if we have 1.75 planets, which I have a 5-year-old daughter, a 7-year-old son. Even they can figure out that this is not sustainable. The second problem with all of this waste and all of this consumption is the enormous amount of CO2 emissions that are being generated, which are rapidly warming the planet and creating an existential threat to humanity. And it's worth pointing out at this point that the real problem is the excessive consumption and waste of the richest 10% of people in the world, which are generating half of all emissions. And by the way, that is likely all of us on this call today. And so to us in our homes, you might be thinking, gosh, how on earth can we possibly make a difference? How can we tackle this enormous waste problem? And the first thing I'd like to do is introduce you to Bayard Johnson's waste reduction hierarchy in her wonderful book called The Zero Waste Home. And at the very top is refuse. People want to give you stuff that you don't want or need the whole time. And we've all got to get comfortable with saying a very polite no thank you. The next thing that we all have to do is think about reducing our consumption. We just don't need all the stuff that marketeers have convinced us are absolutely critical to our lives. And I think we've definitely experienced that during COVID-19. Next comes reuse. We need to reuse and share with our local community absolutely everything that we can so that these resources are fully utilized. And after that comes recycle. And when you think of sort of talking about waste, managing waste, that is where most people's minds go to. But as you can see in this waste hierarchy, recycling is just slightly better than landfill, in my opinion. By the time you've baked in all of the enormous energy costs that are associated with recycling, it really isn't the solution. And we are not going to recycle our way out of our climate crisis. And the fact that so little of what we actually put out to be recycled ends up getting recycled just reinforces that. And another thing that we can use to solve this waste crisis in our homes is digital technology. And that's where OLIO comes in. So what we are doing is harnessing the power of digital technology to solve the problem of waste in the home at scale. So we're an app with over 2 million users now, and we connect people who have food or other household items that they don't want or need with their neighbours so that they can give them away. And whilst we hate waste of any variety, we are particularly passionate about solving the problem of food waste. So you might be surprised to discover that well over half of all food waste takes place in the home. And that's actually quite counterintuitive. Most people assume that the majority of food waste takes place at a retail store level, and that couldn't be further from the truth. A mere 2 percentage points of all food waste takes place at a retail store level. Half of all food waste takes place in the home, with the average UK family throwing away about 20% of the weekly shop. It's worth £730 sterling per year per family and collectively adds up to £14 billion of perfectly good food being thrown away. And with food waste being the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after the USA and China, then it is absolutely imperative that we stop this household waste of food at scale very quickly. And we're thrilled to have built the OLIO app to enable people to do this. Half of all the food added to the app is requested in under 1 hour. And to date, we've had over 5 million portions of food being shared. And so to close out, as you're hopefully all thinking about what part you can play in solving our waste problem, you might find it daunting and overwhelming when you realize that we are surrounded by waste. But I'd encourage you to take inspiration from the words of Dr. Jane Goodall, who said that she likes to envision the whole world as a jigsaw puzzle. If you look at the whole picture, it is overwhelming and terrifying. But if you work on your little part of the jigsaw and know that people all over the world are working on their little bits, then that's what will give you hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tessa. I love those words from Jane Goodall as well at the end. Very inspirational for all of us. So our next keynote is from Anthony Levy, the founder and CEO of Cistor, a technology solution provider. He spent the last 11 years leading behavioral change in the circular economy for technology. Anthony is going to show that there are simple solutions to our problems of e-waste without reducing our reliance on technology. All we need is a change of mindset. Over to you, Anthony.
Thank you, Siån, and hello, everyone. So I think it's fair to say for most of us that our belief in sustainability as a concept is an all-time high. Unfortunately, our actions don't match our aspirations when we actually come to talk about technology itself. It's pretty clear that when we're transitioning phones every 2.5 years, when our organization's corporate networks change in less than 5 years, that we're creating a lot of waste. In fact, it's about 50 million tons of e-waste that's generated every year. And unfortunately, only around 17% of that is actually recycled. If that wasn't enough, let's look at the actual process and what it takes to build these products in the first place. For a moment, think about the amount of land that has to be cleared to access the rare minerals and metals required to build our devices, or the high energy intensive approach to manufacturing that's required, or perhaps the complicated mess of transportation and logistics needed to actually get those devices through a manufacturing process and into our hands. In total, if you combine all of that resource and energy that's required to build these devices, you realize that it's not only massive, it's largely hidden. And because of how fast we move through the cycle of technology change, it's very quickly wasted. But there's some good news. The solutions are relatively simple. In my organization, we embrace the principles of a circular economy. And I'm not going to go through all of that, but just to name two that I think are really applicable here in technology. Probably the first, simplest and most impactful thing we could all do to reduce our impact on the environment with technology is simply to use our technology for longer. Whether it's an iPhone or an entire corporate network, most technology can be used for at least 3 years longer than it's being used for today. And this isn't some niche solution. We've just deployed this on an aircraft carrier, and probably one of the most demanding technology environments on the planet. We've successfully extended the life of the technology for another 3 years, not only avoiding huge quantities of waste, but actually avoiding millions of public investment that would have been needed. So these solutions aren't just scalable, they're also cost effective. The second principle I want to introduce you to is about buying remanufactured technology. Now, let's be clear, this is not used or second-hand equipment. This is technology that's brought back by the original manufacturer who puts it through an extremely rigorous process to take it back to be as good as new, and providing it back into the market with the same warranty, the same software, the same accessories. But crucially, it takes 90% less CO2 to remanufacture an item as it does to build a new one. Can you think of one other thing you can do in your life that would reduce your CO2 consumption by 90%? 85% of the materials used can be reused in a remanufactured product. So think about all the waste that can be avoided too. This is particularly key in plastics and rare metals that are actually really difficult to extract in some recycling processes. My organization has already filled the equivalent of the Royal Albert Hall with remanufactured technology deployed in its solutions. That's massive if you think about the reduction in land use, the reduction in resources, and ultimately the reduction in landfill and technology. I really believe that technology can be the answer in sustainability, and we've got good examples of that here. Of course, we've all dialed into this conference when we could have traveled here, and if we'd have traveled, we'd have produced lots of CO2 in the process. But we have to remember that technology itself sits on physical assets that have been built and that actually cause an environmental impact themselves. We need societal change to reflect on that and change behavior. We need to combat those marketing messages that was just talked about. That fear of missing out, I must need that new feature, that new device. We've got to stop buying new over and over. And we've got to challenge our own organizations to move away from this bias that new is better. If we can trust an approved used car to transport our family, surely we can trust the data on our networks to be transported on a remanufactured network. In the recession that's likely to come, we're going to be challenged as a group that cares about sustainability. People are going to think it's a luxury we can ill afford. But actually using remanufactured technology can save you and your organization's money. And in fact, if you're extending the life of technology, little or no investment is required. But if I was to leave you with one thing to go away and think about, it's this. As an individual, you personally have a responsibility to think about how you use technology and to challenge your own organization to change its approaches to using technology too. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. I love that. I'm looking forward to the panel and asking you a few questions about the whole thing of technology and artificial obsolescence, which we have become so familiar with when we're looking at things like iPhones. Our final speaker is Mikela Druckman, co-founder and CEO of Greyparrot. Mikela heads up a technology startup providing waste recognition software using AI. She's an award-winning commercial leader with experience in bringing AI, computer vision, and augmented reality to new industries. And she is passionate about using technology to have a positive impact. Mikela is also a member of the platform Accelerating the Circular Economy, which is PACE, started by the World Economic Forum. Over to you, Mikela.
Thank you, Siån. Hi, everyone. I'm Mikela Druckman, the co-founder and CEO of Greyparrot, where we're on a mission to digitize waste to be able to increase transparency and automation in that sector. So I'll use the next few minutes to talk about the state of waste and then showcase a few technologies that can potentially help. So first of all, we can all agree that the world is in a waste crisis. So we produce about 2 billion tons of solid waste per year, and 60% of that is going to uncontrolled landfill and open dumps. And this is going to keep growing to 3.5 billion by 2050 at the current rates. And unfortunately, 14% of that is recycled. And as Siån mentioned before, for plastics, this number is even lower. So this has huge, major ecological and environmental impact as we're extracting more resources and also polluting our planet. And so there's an urgent need to create a world where we don't think about these resources as waste, but we actually think of them as valuable resources. And that means we have to monitor, capture them, and reuse them in the most effective way. The good news is that there are some macro trends that are also driving change. So the first one is China closing its doors to waste. So as some of you may know, we have been sending most of our waste to China to be separated and recycled there. And since 2018, when China closed its doors, it meant that especially developed economies like the UK, Europe, and the US had to rethink their system to be able to keep that in the countries, and therefore investing much more in infrastructures to recycle the waste. Secondly, we're seeing more and more regulation, like the EU imposing a 65% recycling rate by 2035. And also, for example, in the UK, a plastic ban that will actually tax the products that don't have enough recycled materials in their products. We're also seeing pressures from markets and consumers forcing brands to try to become more circular. So companies like Nestle, Coca-Cola, Unilever are now committing to having more recycled materials in their products, which means that we're creating a stable demand for recycled materials instead of just comparing them to the raw virgin materials, especially in plastics. And so I wanted to look also a little bit at the economics of waste, because that's where we can see how we can drive change. So for those of you who wondered how this works, as consumers, we produce our waste, or as businesses, and we separate them. These are then collected and separated in sorting facilities by private companies that are waste managers. Then that waste is being separated by machines and often by people. About 30–40% of it is still done manually because the current machines are not able to separate that waste. And finally, it ends up in these big bales. But we are auditing less than 1% of that waste, which means that contamination or low scrap plastics can be sent to the other side of the world without knowing. And although governments are trying to get more information on that, because it is done manually, it is very difficult to get more information. And finally, the trade of waste is also very opaque, as the pricing is done, again, by a visual auditing and very randomly. So it is very difficult to get any information on this sector. And so this is why Greyparrot, our vision is to create a fully digitized and automated transparent waste system, from smart bins that can tell you where contamination is, sorting robots that can support the manual sorting, adaptive machines to different material, and automated audits to empower regulators and other stakeholders to basically improve how waste is being separated. So computer vision specifically in AI can have a big impact because it can recognize today at a very affordable price these different materials. So an example here, this is consumer facing, where we see people that are being helped via these technologies to know where to put their recycling, or also, like you see on the right, the iTainer, multiple reverse vending machines allowing for decentralized waste systems and rewarding people when they recycle and bring back their mixed material. This is another example where we're monitoring the residue lines. So this is the lines in those facilities where everything is going to go to landfill. This is about 15 to 20% of all our waste. And here we're helping the waste managers identify when they're losing very high value materials like paper and aluminium for them to avoid going to landfill. And currently, these are done via manual audits, like you can see at the top. Another example here is measuring the purity. So we ensure that low scrap plastics and low value plastics are not being sent overseas, where they will probably not be recycled and thrown into nature. Or again here, being able to track, for example, brands to encourage extended producer responsibility, EPR, and have better feedback loops with different stakeholders. And so this is where we're on a mission to digitize waste, because we believe that with these technologies, we can help to monitor and sort waste at a higher scale with flexible systems and AI technology. So at Greyparrot, we believe that we have to extract the value of waste to also be able to keep our planet clean. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the conversation now.
Great. Thank you so much, Mikela. And as someone who's slightly obsessed by waste, as you can imagine with what I do at A Plastic Planet, I'm really looking forward to digging a little bit deeper into the role of brands in everything that you're doing and the extent of responsibility.
Yeah.
But first, I thought, let's go back to Tessa, because I thought everything that you're doing, Tessa, is obviously quite dependent on on individual action. And I wondered if this is a very deliberate move for you to focus on individuals and what can happen within the home versus working much more with the corporates. Do you think that individuals can make enough of a difference?
Yeah, so you're right. We have deliberately focused on individuals because it might be somewhat simplistic, but the way we look at it is that billions of small actions got us into this mess in the first place. So surely by the same logic, billions of small actions can get us out of it. And also, as we sort of look at the world, we can see that I think individuals are saying, well, governments aren't taking action, so maybe this isn't that important. And governments are saying, well, individuals aren't demanding action, so maybe that isn't important. And we're stuck in this sort of vicious cycle that no one's really breaking. But we can very clearly see that there is a group of people who understand the reality of the world that we live in, who understand we don't have much time. And there are organizations such as OLIO and many others who are empowering and galvanizing those people to take action. And that action has a massive impact, because you might be thinking, well, first of all, in looking at the waste side, you might throw 2 brown bananas in the bin and think, well, what's the big difference? It's only 2 brown bananas. Well, there's 28 million other households taking that same action, right? So of course that's important. And then the flip side of that is that, back to the sort of every pound you spend is a vote for the world that you want. Every time you switch your money from something that is wasteful or unethical or unsustainable to something that's the opposite of that, you are sending data points, very clear data points, back to these corporates who look at their sales data very, very closely. And that is why, and so true change will require systems change, but I believe that's only going to be instigated by empowered individuals taking action.
Do you think it also might be helped by the fact that we have already signed up to the European mandate of having food waste collected from every UK household by the end of 2022-23? Do you think that's going to make a big difference? Because it'll be more visible to us.
Yeah. I am a big believer in that what gets measured gets done. And arguably, actually, we haven't had enough measurement and goal setting. The sort of UK approach to food waste to date has been very voluntary. So we have something called Quartile 2025, which is a cross-industry voluntary initiative to attempt to reduce food waste by 20% by 2025. But the UN Sustainable Development Goal is to halve it by 2030. And certainly there are countries that have embedded that UN Sustainable Development Goal into the legislature. And that, I believe, is what is it really sort of focuses the mind when you know that you've made that sort of concrete commitment. So I think we need a lot more concrete commitments here in the UK around tackling food waste.
Yeah. And I wonder if coming out of the pandemic and everybody coming out of lockdown, and all you ever see is people's, sourdough loaves on Instagram and stuff like that. But, maybe people also, we're just reconnecting to food, I think, in a slightly different way, having had such a grab and go lifestyle for many years.
Yeah. So there's data that's been released by an amazing organization called Hubbub, and they have found that over half of people have said that they, since COVID, they are now valuing food more. And 48% of people have said that they're wasting food less. And that is just amazing. That is a step change that honestly would have taken years and years and years to happen. And it's happened sort of seemingly overnight. And so that is one kind of silver lining, I guess, to the pandemic. The other one point I did just want to pick up on your point around household food waste collections. So clearly, ensuring that your food waste goes to compost is much, much better than it going off to landfill, where it creates methane, which is 25 times more deadly than CO2. But we're really concerned that people don't think, oh, I'm composting my food, I've solved that problem. Because actually, the vast majority of greenhouse gas emissions associated with food waste is associated with the production of the food. And so whenever food is wasted, you are wasting all of the resources that went into producing that food. So every year, for example, a quarter of humanity's fresh water is used to grow food that's never eaten. And it doesn't matter if you're composting your food at the end, we've still wasted a quarter of our fresh water. A landmass larger than China is used every year to grow food that is never eaten. That is still being wasted when we compost the food. So I think we have to be very, very careful. We've got to stop wasting the food, and where it's unavoidable, then compost is the best option.
But it's not the default.
No.
Absolutely. Mikela, I wanted to pick up on, obviously, this is about individuals wasting less food. But when we're looking at waste at a macro scale, as you are, and obviously there's a lot of talk at the moment about EPR, extended producer responsibility. Do you think that EPR could even work? Can people truly take responsibility for the brands and the production and the waste that they create without the metrics that you're talking about? How are we ever going to track anything?
Yeah, well, that is what's being very difficult, is that even if we have those policies that are putting in place, it's actually very difficult to track. So you see projects, like wanting to integrate watermarks in every single product to track every bottle that is going somewhere. So that might work for higher value materials, but it's not realistic to include that in every single product. So we need to have much cheaper and affordable ways to be able to give at least an indication of where those products are going. So that's one thing that we're trying to work on, for example. But ultimately, there needs to be much, much more regulation on the packaging itself. For the brands. So today, these brands are allowed to put packaging out into the market that is simply not recyclable. So not recyclable doesn't mean that they don't have recyclable materials, but they are just simply not recyclable in the system. So for example, the Pringles box is the typical, example. You'll have paper and plastic and aluminium on it, which individually could be recycled, but nobody's going to separate those parts. So there needs to be essentially a lot more collaboration with the packaging manufacturers and the waste managers to ensure that the technology and the systems that are in place are able to track and separate those items. And I think that is the first intervention that needs to happen for the brand owners.
Yeah, absolutely. I rail often against that word recyclable.
Yeah,
it's like the guilt appease. Oh, I made it out of recyclable material. It's not my problem or my fault if it doesn't actually get recycled.
Exactly.
And the other thing I would love more analysis on is, what do things actually get recycled into? Which brings us on to you, Anthony, because I love this new word, remanufactured. That's a new for us, really, that we don't talk about nearly enough. And that's 90% less CO2 if you remanufacture something. But how do we overcome this bias against remanufactured technology?
I think you hit the nail on the head with your first comment there. I think there's a whole awareness element that's missing. I think, I applaud all the efforts to improve recycling. It's absolutely critical. But in our world, because so much is invested in the technology, in the building of this technology and the process, that recycling is almost the worst case scenario compared to reuse and remanufactured. But still, most of my team, when we engage with customers, less than 90% of people have ever heard of this. These capabilities to have remanufactured technology. It's just not something that's really in people's mindset. So I guess if everyone could spread the word, that'd be a good start. I think there's an element of once you get beyond and once you hear about remanufactured technology, there's an immediate kind of emotional response about, is it going to be as good as new? Maybe it will break down quicker. And those misconceptions aren't true, but I think you've got to be able to show people that rather than just tell them. So I think there's an element of getting people exposure to remanufactured technology, but you can start to see it happening. There's a few telecoms companies that are starting to promote remanufactured phones, and we're seeing more and more with the manufacturers we work with that they all have remanufactured programs. It's just about getting the message out there. And I guess if there was something I could give people to actually do with it, I guess is it once you do use remanufactured technology is not to be embarrassed about it, it's to be proud of it. And I think, actually having people willing to promote that they've adopted remanufactured technology would go a long way to starting the path of us using it more generally.
Yeah, and hopefully I think we can perhaps follow in the footsteps of the fashion industry, because I think you can see now with the growth of resale sites like Depop, if we could do that with technology, wouldn't that be a great start, where it's actually a badge to be proud of? Yeah, my phone used to be somebody else's phone. I think that would just be a wonderful place to get to, wouldn't it?
I think it's something we have to admit that actually in technology itself, we're quite far behind in sustainability terms. It's quite an immature market. You guys in food and in fashion are actually further ahead. Much as we like to think technology is always cutting edge, actually in this part of the world's psyche, we're really not.
Yeah, I know that we've got to start to do a bit of a wrap, and a few questions are coming through on Slido, so thank you everybody for those, and we're going to be rolling those into our Q&A session that starts very shortly. But I wanted to give a little provocation to our panel today, which is just think of two things. One is, what is the thing that you are most scared of right now, most in fear of, and what is the thing that you are most excited about? And I'm going to start quickly with mine, which I think the thing I'm most fearful of is that we don't grab this moment and that we revert back to old ways and old patterns, because it's so rare for us to have an opportunity for really seismic change where there are vacuums that we can fill with new ideas rather than the same old ideas. So when people talk about going back to normal and all of those cliches, I'm in fear of that. I don't want that to happen. And the thing I'm most excited about is looking at what Amsterdam are doing, rebuilding their economic model based on the donut economy, Kate Raworth's donut economic model. And I find that absolutely fascinating, of rather than constantly pursuing growth, how can we focus on everybody and everything on the planet thriving in a completely different way? And to have a very sophisticated European city like Amsterdam pioneering that, I think is going to be something wonderful for us all to watch and follow. So I'm going to start with Tessa again. What, Tessa, are you most fearful of and most excited about?
So my most fearful of definitely echoes your fear. I think through COVID-19, we have seen what a true crisis response looks like. And it makes it very clear how pathetic our response to the climate crisis has been to date. And I am scared that we will not seize this unique moment in time, this unique opportunity. We only have 10 years left, beyond which we start hitting irreversible tipping points. So I'm really scared that we don't seize this opportunity to rebuild the future that we all want and we all need. In terms of what I'm excited about, this is a very, very selfish one. But at OLIO, we have seen our rate of growth, so just the amount of sharing that's happening, more than double post COVID-19. And I think that's a reflection of a couple of things. One, people are recognizing that actually we should not be wasting stuff when someone else living nearby who would like it. And two, we're recognizing the power of community and just this incredible feeling that you get through sharing what you don't want or need with someone living nearby who would like it.
I love those.
That's mine.
Thank you, Mikela.
Thank you. So my fears are linked to one of the comments you said as well. So I think my fear is, can we move fast enough and deep enough to make change? Because ultimately, if we want such large-scale systemic change, it has to tap into our economic systems and the way we value progress and success. And so I'm a big fan of Kate Raworth. I wish her philosophy could be applied beyond Amsterdam. So that's my fear, is that we're not bold enough in how deep we go in our change. And what I'm excited about and positive about is that I'm seeing more and more entrepreneurs, investors, and a whole new generation of innovators that want to solve these problems, and a lot of talent in going into helping solve that. So I think that's very exciting.
Yeah, I agree. Anthony, take it away.
All right, brilliant.
You've got a few minutes, so don't cut it short.
Okay. Well, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the term greenwashing. This is where people kind of dress up what they're already doing in some sustainable light, just for the benefits of getting, the upswell of interest in our area. I fear greenwashing quite a lot, particularly, there are organizations with huge marketing budgets that will do a tremendous job of trying to paint what they do as sustainable, but perhaps in reality really isn't. And maybe will drown out the voices of some of the smaller people that are really making tremendous change in this space. So that's what I fear. I guess what I'm excited about is the human capability to rally and adapt and change. Because I think, certainly as someone who's worked in this space for a long time, sometimes you're not feeling like a lot of things are really changing, certainly not at the pace that we need them to. And it's kind of unfortunate that it's taken the current crisis to show our ability to change. But some things have changed so drastically, none of us can even recognize them. In a matter of days, we can change how we consume things, how we live our lives. And we all know that there's bigger impacts to come in terms of climate change and some of the other things we've talked about. So, but I'm excited that actually we've reminded ourselves of this inherent capability that we can change. And I think if we can all embrace that mindset, then some of the changes we've talked about today aren't dreams. They're near to realities.
Yeah, I love your point about greenwash, because at what point is greenwash nothing but marketing? And one of the things that concerns me is, I live in a world where there is so many pacts and pledges and promises all about plastic reduction and using new materials. And everything is simply just shoved quite far down the road, because nobody is saying we're going to do this in 12 months. And what we try and do at A Plastic Planet, which is why we brought out the plastic-free PPE visors using cellulose, is to at least try and demonstrate that change is possible now. And when I see the Alliance for Ocean Waste, which is signed by the biggest polluters of the planet, signing that with one hand, dedicating billions to eradicating ocean pollution, and with the other hand, signing the investment in cheap fracking gases in Texas to pump out even more plastic. And when I look at all those things, it's like arsonists lobbying for better fire extinguishers. And that kind of greenwash is just so frustrating, because all it does is obviate real change, confuse everybody, make people think that things are happening when actually nothing is happening. But you three are at the front, cutting edge of making change happen in all these different ways. And it's been such a pleasure to learn a little bit more about the technologies that you're pioneering. And they're all so different, but so connected, because the number one thing is we have to stop the waste. Imagine a world where nothing hits the bin. What right do we have to continue to increase the amount of waste every single day? That's 3.5 million tons every single day. Where do we think it's all going to go? Probably we think it's going to go to space. I don't know if anyone's seen the amazing image of space waste. Have you ever seen that? It's incredible. And you just think, oh, that's where we're putting it. We're sending it out to space now, of course. How simple.
I'm not sure there'll be room in orbit. It doesn't look like there's going to be room in our immediate orbit for that waste. I think we've got a different problem there.
Yeah, I know. I think Mr. Musk is going to take over most of that extra space. So we are wrapping in 30 seconds. We've got lots of questions come through on Slido. Thank you, everybody who's watching, for sending those over. We're going to pick all of those up in the next session. And we hope to see you on the other side. Thank you.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.